Want to call the meeting to order, December 20th, East Greenbush Central School District Board of Education meeting. Attendance tonight, we have Mr. Dunn, Mr. Mann, Mr. Bryan, Ms. Curtin, Ms. Taylor. We expect Michelle's not going to be here, and Cheryl is out of town. Right. Great. Okay, thank you. Okay, with that, could you please join in, rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. This evening's meeting is focused primarily on our planning for a potential capital project this evening, so not a lot of other business, but we do have a few things to get through tonight. First order of business is the board forum. Board members, anything? John? Okay. Mark? Jennifer? Kathleen?
Just very quickly, I was at a blood drive today at the Albany Community Center down on 460 Aiken Avenue in Rensselaer, and got talking with somebody, and the gentleman, he said, have you ever been here before? I said, no, I haven't. I said, what is the Albany Community Center? And found out that that is where our Turkish community gathers, and they have a variety of programs, and they have invited us down anytime we would like to go. They did mention Turkish coffee at night. I don't think any of us need that. But I have given Mr. Simons the card for the gentleman there. So if anybody's interested in making a connection with our Turkish community, it was something that I did not even realize was in our area. So.
Thanks, Kathleen. Joanne? Emily? Okay. Moving to our public forum. Residents, students, employees, and business representatives of the East Greenbush Central School District may address the board on matters concerning programs and or operation of the district other than matters involving personnel. Members of the board do not directly respond to system concerns in the public forum. If a response is appropriate, either the president or superintendent will contact the individual in the near future. Those persons wishing to address the board will be recognized by the chair of the meeting and should state for the record their name, address, or affiliation with the district or business. While the board does not wish to infringe upon free speech protections, it must be stressed that the visitors forum is not deemed to be an open forum. The board president will conduct the forum through ordinary efficient operation of board business. In addition, any remarks which may be considered defamatory or stigmatizing are prohibited and will be declared out of order. All comments shall be limited to 5 minutes. Is anyone who would like to address the board this time? No? All right. We'll move on to our reports and presentations of the superintendent of schools. I'll turn it over to Mr. Simons.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Board of Education members, to our members of our community, our construction team. I want to begin tonight's presentation by first introducing some of the key individuals that help us to put together the information that we're going to present this evening. We have with us Paul Bickel, who is our Director of Facilities with the East Greenbush Central School District, Linda Wager, our Director of Business and Finance. Representing March Associates, which is the district's appointed architect, we have Chris Crolius, who is the principal partner in March Associates, and Steve Wickman, who is the architect that works directly with our district. We also have representatives from St. Reuben, Dave Hollander, who is the vice president now of the Chase Construction, which has recently been affiliated with St. Reuben. Tom Sirianni, who works directly in the district with as our project manager, and Mike Frattarola, who is also a project manager with St. Reuben. So these groups and individuals helped us to put together the building condition survey information and also reflect on some future capital work that we would like to begin discussing with the board and the community for a future referendum vote. I'm going to start by just taking a little bit of a time this evening to kind of set the stage for what we're talking about. It's been a while since we've talked about actually going out to the community and voting on a capital project. the 2017 project that was overwhelmingly approved by the voters is still in progress, and we anticipate completing that work by the end of this school year. So under the state requirements, however, districts are required to be good stewards of the taxpayers' resources, and the Board of Education and the district is responsible for making sure that the resources of the East Greenbush resident taxpayers are utilized efficiently and effectively. And one of the main responsibilities we have is to make sure that our facilities that house and serve the educational program for more than 4,000 students are well maintained. As part of that, I want to recognize our custodial, our maintenance staff, and our ground staff, because they do a terrific job maintaining our buildings and also tending to our fields and making sure that our properties are taken care of. However, in New York State, if we want to spend money to renovate a building and the cost of that renovation exceeds $10,000, we have to go to the state and we have to follow a process. That process includes preparing some of the information that I'm going to present this evening. Bit of a fun fact, individuals within our community may look at the district through the lens of their own school. So for example, families that attend Belltop or staff that attend Belltop or Donald P. Sutherland School or Goff Middle School may look at the district through a lens that's a little bit more focused and perhaps a little bit more narrow than all of the responsibilities that we talk about in terms of putting together a capital project. East Greenbush Central School District owns more than 814,000 square feet of building. 814,000 square feet of building. That includes the 7 schools that we serve, as well as our transportation center and our grounds department building located on Columbia High School. We are also responsible for more than 200,000 acres of property. So this is a fairly sizable operation. And when we put forth plans to renovate our schools, to fix the issues that need to be repaired, it's important that we consider the entire district and also look at it from a comprehensive standpoint. As part of that process, New York State requires school districts to complete a building condition survey. That building condition survey information is being presented to the board this evening. So we're not at a point where we are presenting a full capital project proposal. We are sharing with you preliminary information that's been put together that will be submitted in March to the State Education Department through the building condition survey process. And Mr. Bickle and Ms. Swagger will talk a little bit about that along with our architect, Steve Wickman, later on this evening. This information includes a review of all of our buildings and all of our grounds. It takes under consideration the priorities that have been identified from an architectural standpoint, an engineering standpoint. It also takes under consideration information on scope of projects that we may not have been able to get to in the 2017 capital project that, again, we are completing at the end of this school year. In addition, it reflects some of the concerns and some of the issues that have been raised by community members, by faculty and staff, and by board members over the course of the last several years. It is very preliminary, however. It is not, there is a need to continue to engage our board, our stakeholders in asking tough questions and fine-tuning some of the information and working through a process that hopefully will involve a number of different stakeholders, so at the end of the day, when we propose a project to the community, it will be perceived as a community project, as opposed to the administration's project or the board's project. Additionally, all capital projects in New York State have to be approved by the New York State Education Department in order to be completed and in order to be eligible for building aid reimbursement. Included within the building condition survey is a 5-year plan and an executive summary. The 5-year plan information will include much of what you see on the larger spreadsheets that we have made available to the board and to the public this evening. So in putting together a capital project, there is a lot that is involved. One of the decisions that we have to make is the scope of the work. What are we actually going to propose to the community to fix? What are we going to propose to replace? What are some of the issues that we hope to be able to address in the overall scope of the project? The cost. Cost is going to be looked at from a number of different vantage points, but there are two primary considerations. What will the overall total cost of the project be? But also, how can we structure the project in such a way to maximize the amount of state support, state aid that will come to support the project, and what can we do to minimize or reduce the portions of the project that may impact the local taxpayers of East Greenbush. Stakeholder engagement, I mentioned this earlier. We want to involve people in the process so that at the end of our proposal, people can see that they were invested, that they were listened to, and there were things that were included within the project that were issues that we were experiencing in various buildings. And timing. Timing will be driven by a number of different factors, including the level of confidence that the board will have in the information as we move through this process, the input that we receive from stakeholders, and there's also very important financial information that Mrs. Wager is going to share with you tonight that will drive the timing of our recommendation for proposed project. That includes information on our current debt, and it also includes key information on how the state aid formula works for capital project building aid reimbursement. What are we going to look at? We're going to look at every building in terms of the scope. We're going to make sure that the board has complete information, and we're going to have to make sure that we can explain the rationale as to why we chose to put certain things into the project and why we chose to keep certain aspects of the project out in terms of the scope. I talked about structuring the project in such a way that New York State will pay the largest share of the project. Mrs. Wager is going to go over that formula in just a little bit. Stakeholder engagement, we've talked about. So what will the process be leading to Board of Education approval? This is something that we want feedback from the board. We're not looking for direction, specific direction this evening. We're just looking for some of your key questions and your key concerns. We want to make sure that the voters are well informed about what we're doing through transparency, making sure that the information continues to be shared in the public. How long will it take to design the project? Mrs. Wager will talk a little bit about some of the SED timeline considerations. Again, and how do we maximize the state aid that is available for this project, and how do we time it in such a way as we're paying off previous debt. So we're going to transition to cost and finance. I'm going to ask Mrs. Wager to come forward. And again, we welcome the board's questions, we welcome the community's questions, and we welcome everyone's input into this process.
Thank you, Mr. Simons. So this evening, as we continue to plan our next capital project, there are certain things that we'll be reviewing with you on a regular basis. But tonight, what I'd like to speak to you about is we're going to talk about building aid, how our building aid is calculated, how it is paid to us as the district, and as well as we're going to be reviewing some terms that you'll hear us be using throughout this capital project. Those terms include building aid units. We'll talk about what those are. And the important maximum cost allowance we'll also speak about. I will also speak to you about the correlation, the effect that the correlation between our debt service and our state aid has on our local taxpayer shares. So to begin, I wanted to give you an example of a time frame of how capital projects work. So basically, we spoke about our next building condition survey is due to the State Education Department by March of 2023. So from that date, if we use this example, from that date until October of 2023, we would work and meet with stakeholders, Board of Education, administrators, about our next project, prioritize our next project, and take into effect some later terms that we're going to be talking about to develop a multi-phase, multi-year capital project. We would, in this example, go out to propose the capital project to our residents in October of 2023. From that point on, it takes about a year until about October, November of 2024 for the architects to finalize the final drawings and plans to be submitted and approved by SED. So with that in mind, we would look to go out to bid this project, the beginning phases of this project in February of 2025. And this is very important because this allows us, this early going out to bid allows us to receive more bids from qualified contractors. And then we would look to, in this example, start construction in the summer of 2025. So some terms that I wanted to review with you. We talked about building aid units. Building aid units refer to the capacity in a building. That's not to be confused with the enrollment in a building. This is calculated by SED. They literally take the number of classrooms in a building and multiply it by what they say a class size is 27. And then it is multiplied by another rate. And there are different rates depending on the grade level, as well as designated special education spaces. All of these factors that I'm going to talk to you about factor into how we calculate the maximum cost allowance. So the next factor is the regional cost factor. This is a factor that reflects the difference in the labor market. This is updated annually by the Commissioner of Labor, and it is by county. And currently in Rensselaer County, the regional cost factor is 1.0928. Another factor is the construction cost index. This is a factor that is updated monthly, and it reflects the change in the cost of labor and materials. So when we submit a project, the factor that is used for the construction cost index is the factor that is in the current month when the construction contract is signed. All of these are used in calculating the maximum cost allowance. This is extremely important because this is the maximum amount of expenditures that we can receive building aid on. It is calculated by individual building, not district-wide. So there is a maximum cost allowance for each of our 7 buildings, which we will review shortly. It is calculated by taking the building aid units, multiplying it by the regional cost factor, and then multiplying it by the construction cost index. And then it is broken down into construction costs and incidental costs. There is also an adjustment that is made to the maximum cost allowance, and that is a deduction for any current open projects that are less than 5 years old. So with that in mind, I wanted to make sure we understand the difference between construction costs and incidental costs. Construction costs is any work performed, refers to any work performed on the building. So it's from the roof to the basement and inside the walls. It includes such items as the HVAC systems, electrical, plumbing, roofing, as well as asbestos abatement, which is one of those items that can get very expensive. Incidental costs, on the other hand, there's a couple of different categories. Incidental costs include soft costs, which are known as our professional services, which include our construction management services, as well as our architectural costs and legal expense. Also included in incidental costs, and this is very important, are our site improvements. That's any work that's done outside of the building. So that would be the paving of our parking lots or our sidewalks. It would be replacing or upgrading playgrounds as well as athletic fields.
A question. In the construction cost index, the factor used is the factor in the calendar month of the construction contract is signed. When does that typically happen?
So that will happen in the beginning of each month. And so as we...
No, when is the contract signed to determine the...
Yeah, that's after we go out to bid.
Right. So what's the, I'm just trying to think about construction costs at a certain time frame versus when the work actually starts. That could be a long time.
Well, it could be. In the example that I gave, we would go out to bid, say in February. We would probably sign the contract sometime in April and start construction in the summer of 2025. That's just a broad guideline. So there is a couple of months difference there. The factor does change on a monthly basis,
Okay.
but I would not expect it to change within a few months substantially.
Okay, thanks.
So we talked about the maximum cost allowances. So I wanted to provide this information to you so you could see the importance of timing of this project. Right now, this is Green Meadow School. So Green Meadow School, we currently have $9.7 million maximum cost allowance in construction and the $1.9 million in incidentals. However, these were for projects that were approved of Phase 2 work, which happened last summer at Green Meadow. They were approved in September of 2019 by SED. So that amount is $2.9 million for construction and $1.2 million for incidental. That is deducted from our current maximum cost allowance. That amount won't be added back in for 5 more years from the date of the approval of the project. So that reset date is September of 2024. That's why we talked about the timing of the projects and how important that is, because you'll see, like, this is Phase 2 work. Very similarly, Red Mill was also Phase 2 work. So you can see that we did $2.9 million in construction, 1.3 in incidentals, which won't be reset back into the maximum cost allowance until September of 2024. I wanted to point this out because Goff was Phase 2 work. We did work at Goff last summer. And so we have some construction costs of $3.2 million as well as incidentals of 1.8. Then, and that was approved in September of 2019. That reset date will again be September of 2024. However, we then, as the project was ongoing, we realized that we had an issue with Goff piping. We had some leaking pipes at Goff, and so we looked to correct that situation. That got approved by SED in November of 2021. So that amount won't be added back into our maximum cost allowance until November of 2026. Those were the Phase 2 schools. So now we move on to the Phase 3 schools. The Phase 3 work was done just this past summer, so the dates are a little bit different. Belltop, you'll see that their Phase 2 project was approved in February of 2021. So the maximum cost allowance won't reset again until February of 2026. Very similar situation with DPS. We did work out there this summer. And Janae was the same way. We did all of the work this summer. The high school. At the high school, that was a Phase 3 project. We did work at the high school this past summer. That was approved in February of 2021. So the reset for the $1.4 million in construction and the 3.3 in incidental won't be until February of 2026. While this project was going on, we realized that the fire alarm system at the high school was becoming obsolete. We were not able to have it repaired, and it was becoming difficult to replace parts. So we moved forward on replacing the fire alarm system at the high school. That got approved by SED in October of 2022. And therefore, that money won't reset again until October of 2027. So that's why I point out to you that, the timing of the project and the multi-phase is going to become very important so that we can maximize our aid. So building aid is paid to us. It's based on the assumed amortization schedule for a probable useful life. So the state recognizes that renovations that are done in a building, they pay that aid over a 15-year schedule. If we were to add additions to our building, that aid gets paid over 20 years. And if we were to build a new building, that aid gets paid to us over 30 years. In our case, everything we're doing is considered renovations, so we would expect the aid paid over 15 years. So as a general example, and this is very general, I wanted to just provide round numbers. If we were to go out with a $50 million district-wide project, not everything is aidable. An example would be some furniture is not aidable. So what we say is we use about an average of 95% is considered aidable. So if I take that 50 million, I multiply it by 95%, I would expect to receive aid on $47.5 million. Our current building aid ratio is 73.2%. So on a total project of $50 million, excuse me, I would expect to receive $34,770,000 in aid. That would be paid over 15 years. The aid starts to get paid in the year following when the final cost reports are filed. So we would expect on this project, a project of this size, to receive $2.3 million a year for 15 years. We talked about the importance and the correlation between debt and building aid and matching that so that it has the least effect on our local taxpayers. This bar graph indicates to you that our local share is currently at about $2.5 million. So each year, we have in the general fund budget approximately $2.5 million included in our debt service lines that we'll be paying on principal and interest on our current debt. As you can see in this example, 23, 24, 24, 25, it remains stable. In 25, 26, it really drops off. That happens for two reasons. We have debt that is maturing in that year, and then we also have the full amount of state aid will be coming in on the current project. So that really drops it down. So that's when we talk about the timing of the project. What we'll look to do is issue and pay debt in the 25-26 school year. That's why in the example I used, I said, okay, we start construction in the summer of 2025. I would expect then to pay some debt in that school year so that we can get that local share back up at about the $2.5 million. Now, that's important because, you know, when you look at this, you say, oh, okay, well, we don't have as much debt. But it's important to maintain a consistency because this allows us to do the work on the buildings, make the renovations, make the improvements we need to make while not affecting the taxpayers significantly. If we just decided to let that drop, it might be nice for a year or two, but down the line, we have to make those improvements and it will create a significant spike in the taxes. So that's why we'll continue to look at the timing. There's a lot of information there, a lot of terms. We will continue to update you on all of these. We'll continue to update the calculations on the maximum cost allowances as we proceed. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Stephen Wickman, our architect. Thank you.
Good evening. So I'm going to start talking about East Greenbush's building condition survey. As Jeff mentioned, the state requires this every 5 years. Due to prioritization at the state education department and quite frankly a backlog at the state education department, they decided in the 2020 cycle to do a little offsetting of years. So yours is 7 years instead of the standard 5. After this year, you'll go back to 5-year cycle. So your next one will be due in 2027 and 2023 after that. So every 5 years, this needs to be done. The reviews need to be completed by a New York State licensed architect or engineer. Myself and my engineering team have been through each one of the school buildings. We go through every occupied facility. So that's students or staff and staff. What we're looking for is we're trying to identify the condition of existing components, equipment, what items need repair, what items are due for reconstruction or renovations. Once all this information is compiled, we file it electronically with the state education department. And that's done through a SED portal. That's due in March. And the items that you see in front of you, the spreadsheet, those items come directly from the BCS, and those are going to form our 5-year plan. As part of that 5-year plan, I assign priorities to certain work items that were identified. The highest level is immediate and urgent needs. Those are things that need to get taken care of right away. We don't want to put those off for 10 years. The next level would be mid-level, important items, but things that might be able to wait another 5 years. And then the lowest level concern is things that need to get taken care of, but it's not super important to get taken care of immediately. Something that might be cosmetic that needs to be replaced, for instance. We also set up categories for all the work items. The categories we set up for this BCS are health and safe learning environments, inclusivity, accessibility, and Americans with Disabilities Act, future-driven instructional spaces and program improvements, energy efficiency and conservation, and obsolete equipment and facilities improvement. So all of our work items are going to fall under one of those 5 categories. We've taken all those items, we've compiled the priorities, we've compiled the categories, and we have a document that looks like this. It's hard to see on the slide, but each item has a number. Each item has a reference to where that falls in our building condition survey. Next line in is our priorities. Our next line in is category. There's a brief description of the work items and then associated costs. The school has taken it one step farther and has separated out the health and safety items into a separate packet, which you have. That's a smaller packet in your information to group all the health and safety items together. They have also done it for the athletic facilities and the buildings and grounds work. I want to talk briefly about what falls under the health and safe learning environments category. And that would be air conditioning in the elementary schools, an update of the HVAC systems. We have a lot of older HVAC systems, replacement of drinking fountains with new bottle fillers. There are a lot of doors in the district, classroom doors and other spaces where the door is not smoke or fire rated. So we would update those. We would replace exit signs and emergency lighting units. And there's always more asbestos abatement to do. The top slide on the left here is the generator at Janae. What the district would like to do is have the capability to have a plug-in generator connection at each one of the elementary schools. So if the power did go out, if we had an ice storm, we could lease a generator, bring it in, plug it in, and keep the major building components from freezing and becoming damaged. At Goff here, we thought that it'd be better to have a building-wide generator to run the entire building. The transportation center would also get its own built-in generator. The next 2 on the top are doors at Janae Elementary School. These are original doors to the building. They're not smoke rated, they're not fire rated. And basically what the smoke rating does, if a fire starts in a certain area of building, it's not allowed to migrate to other areas and cause difficulties. So that's what the smoke rating on the doors is for. The bottom left is a unit ventilator at Goff, just a very older unit. The motors don't work very well. They're very loud. The next 2 are the Janae sound and lighting system at the auditorium. And that one picture is turned 90 degrees there, but that's the outdated lighting that's above the stage. And that's the dimmer control panel on the right there, that thing that looks like it's from the 60s. That's because it is. So that needs to be replaced. There's a very old porcelain drinking fountain right next to that. That's at Green Meadow. And in our current project, we've been replacing those, but we didn't have the funds to do all of them. So there's still a lot of those left in the district. The district does like the bottle fillers. The kids are a lot more inclined to fill up their bottles than use the drinking fountains, the older ones. Inclusivity, accessibility, and Americans with Disabilities Act. We're always going to run into more handicap accessible improvements we can make in our school buildings. Reconstructing sidewalks and walkways for accessibility, permanent handicap ramps at school entrances, renovating bathrooms for accessibility. We did a lot of that in the current project, and replacing playgrounds at Belltop, DPS, and Green Meadow. The picture in the upper left-hand corner is at Green Meadow. There's 2 steps to get into that entrance door. It's not accessible. Picture right next to it is a wood ramp that Paul's staff added to make it accessible, but it's not a permanent solution. It needs to be replaced with concrete. And basically, when kids exit the building and go use the equipment outside or play in the fields outside, they have to go through another exit that the other students don't use, only because it's not accessible. Next picture over, top right, is Belltop. There is handicap parking up at the top loop at Belltop, but I'm sure during events, there are people using the lower lot that are going to have a hard time getting up that inclined sidewalk at Belltop. The slope of that sidewalk is not handicap accessible. Down in the bottom left, that's the casework for Red Mill. That's original to the building. It's old, it's beat up, and it's not accessible. We replaced a lot of this casework in the current project. Next slide over is the entryway at Janae, and it'll just show you how we've sloped our concrete sidewalks up to that finished floor level to take away the barriers. And the last one to the bottom right, that's DPS. And you can see that at the back of the building at DPS, there's no pathway down to that lower playground. There's no way for students with disabilities to get from the school down to that playground without going through the grass. So it's basically not accessible to them. Turn it over to Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Wickerman. So I've got 3 more categories, the 3 final categories, and then we'll open it up to a Q&A session at the end. So our 3rd category is future-driven instructional spaces with program improvements. And this particular category has a lot to do with what Mr. Simon said at the beginning, stakeholder engagement. So we've already begun the process of meeting with different stakeholders, both within the district and the community, and trying to get their input on different pieces of this. We want everybody to have a piece to put in the puzzle. So far, we've met with the librarians and administrative staff at all the schools. They put together a nice presentation for us and showed us what they'd like as far as modernizing the libraries in the schools. We also met with the athletic director and coaches, and they gave us some feedback on what they're looking for with the athletic facilities throughout the district. Another meeting we had was with some of the outside community groups that use our properties. So for instance, we met with Pop Warner, who uses the backfield at Janae. We also met with Sorensko, East Greenbush Little League, and the Girls Softball League over at that use the Sorensko area and the golf fields over in that area. So I'm going to take you through a couple pictures here. These were provided to us from the librarians. A couple issues. We'll start from the top left that they presented to us. A lot of the books, the shelves just don't have the capacity to completely encapsulate them. So a lot of the books stick out well beyond the shelves. They'd also like the ability to have shelves that are on rollers so they can move them around, make the spaces more interactive. Slide 2 shows the current circulation area at Red Mill. As you can see, this could greatly benefit from some new cabinetry and a nice countertop area. The lower left corner is Janae's library currently, and a lot of the furniture that's in there, we're pretty confident is original to the school. Goes back quite a ways, as well as furniture and fixtures and things in there. So there's a lot of little things that could use updates. But, with the changing times, a lot of things are different with libraries now. So we also want to look to the future and what the future use would be for our libraries. So we're trying to bring in such ideas as you see the bottom two, different, more comfortable, more inviting seating areas for students to study, for classes to gather. And that would be at all schools. Up in the upper right corner there are some of the future possibilities of media type centers for the upper grades, like Goff and Columbia, where students could gather and work together at a table on one of their projects and use the larger screen. So those are a couple items that they presented for us. Another situation right here at Goff, the Goff locker rooms have become somewhat of a storage station. Unfortunately, these pictures were just taken not too long ago. The locker rooms are really in state of disrepair. They're not currently functional or usable for what we're looking for. And one thing I want to mention is a lot of these categories interlock with each other. So you're going to see me talk more on the last category about obsolete facilities and in sports fields. And some of the things that we're throwing in there is, possible additions. We have all this land out here behind Goff, but it's wet most of the year. So we'd like to look into, possibly adding a football field here, adding a track here, raising them up, putting proper drainage under them, adding new soccer fields, and actually being able to use this space. And with that would correlate into the need for, newly improved locker rooms that would get actual use and be used properly. So next slide, our next category is energy efficiency and conservation. Unfortunately, energy costs are always on the rise. It's out of our hands for the most part. We can't do too much about it, especially in times like this. But there is one thing that we can do, and that is in these capital projects, integrate more fuel efficient, more energy efficient products into them. So on the left slide, you'll see the boilers over at Green Meadow. These boilers are roughly 25 years old. They are a practical representation of what is in 6 of the other schools right now. And I'm just gonna forward on a little bit because I've got another picture here. Now, same picture on the left of Green Meadows boiler systems, but to the right we have Janae's boiler systems. Now these are newer condensing boilers, a lot more efficient, a lot smaller in footprint, but still have, and you can see we have 4, so we have extra redundancy. But when you think about it, as Mr. Simons mentioned, there's a huge amount of square footage that we're heating every winter. And when you think about the amount of natural gas that we're using, it makes sense at this time. The boilers in the other schools are at end of life. If we're going to make the investment to replace them, we got to invest and replace them with the most energy efficient ones we can at the time.
Well, I remember taking a tour of the basement here and looking at these. Didn't we do a lot of work in the boiler room itself, though?
We
For piping and
did.
things like
We did a lot of domestic hot water heater replacements.
Okay.
So that was a lot of what happened in the last project. A lot of our hot water heaters were on the fritz, so they got taken care of in the last project. Boilers did not, so that's why boilers are really at that point where I don't know that they would make it to the next project if we weren't to take them into account this time around. And again, just taking into account energy efficiency, there's so much more energy efficient products on the market today. Go down to the lower left corner. This is the unit ventilator. They have vast improvements in technology. Our unit ventilators over the last 2 years, we changed the programming in them to run a lot more, and in the hopes of being able to bring in more fresh air. So they probably got, an extra 5-10 years added on to them in 2 years, and they're already 25 to 30 years old. So like Mr. Wickman said, they're shaking, they're vibrating, the motors are going, they're in very bad shape. So kind of an integration project that is both necessary and would help greatly enhance energy efficiency. And the one other item that we're going to greatly focus on, and it's been a focus for several years, it just hasn't come into play in our capital projects yet, is LED lighting replacements throughout. So just some pictures of some older lights around the district. I think some of them are original to the buildings, but the fluorescent lights and the incandescent bulbs, the difference between LED wattage to those is just, it would save us astronomical amounts of money in the electricity department. So this is the last category, and one of the longer ones, and there's a lot grouped into this that also fits into the other categories. So a couple extra pictures in here that we'll talk about. So there's, with obsolete aging equipment facilities and site improvements, we want to remember that our buildings, even we do have a lot of buildings, but we also have a lot of old buildings. There is a report that was included and showing some of the ages of the different buildings. So we have 3 buildings, DPS, Janay, and Belltop, which are all over 80 years old. Our newest school building is almost 50 years old, Columbia High School. So we have a lot of old aging infrastructure, and unfortunately, we have a lot of issues that come along with that. We're thankful to the state that they provide such a great accommodation to help us through this every 5 years, and we're looking forward to make as many improvements as we can in this next capital project. So the upper left corner, very typical throughout all the schools, masonry repointing. And basically what that is, the mortar joints between the brick basically just disintegrate over time. The freeze thaw works them out. And then once you have a joint that's open like that, it's free reign for the rain to get in and water to get in there and do its damage to brick and things like that. So definitely something we've started in this last project, but there's a lot of it to continue throughout the next couple projects. The second picture over is a picture of a transient panel on the roof of Red Mill, and that picture wasn't taken too long ago. Unfortunately, that panel still sits there. We're going to have to get it back up very quickly, but these have been falling on a regular basis. There was at one point a block wall, which you can see exposed there, that got closed in. Unfortunately, it did not get flashed properly on the top and enclosed properly on the outside. So we'd like to take that apart and rebuild it the correct way so that we're not having these issues. The third picture over in the lower left corner, just some deteriorating pavement at some different buildings. One big thing we'd like to do is possibly repave the main entranceway to Columbia and the bus loop there. It's in a pretty bad state of disrepair. And we would also like to add a walkway for the students to safely get out there. I don't know if you're around there just after dismissal, but most of them are kind of walking down and rumbling in and out of the road, and we're on the guardrails there. So we want to give them a safe way to get out to Luther Road and wherever they may be going. The one on the lower, or the next one over on the right top is some bell top windows. And this one is another one that falls under two categories. This would be an energy efficiency item also. We had a big project that just finished at Janae and DPS replacing some windows. We have obviously a lot more windows throughout the school that need, the school district that need replacement. Some of them are fire concerns as far as fire exits. So we constantly have to lubricate them, operate them, make sure they're working properly. So that is a big concern of mine. We already did the bottom left. I'm going to go with the second one in on the bottom left. Now, this is a picture of the majority of our schools, the gymnasiums that have exterior walls, basically just have long, flat, continuous exterior walls, and they have no cover over the doorways there. So we've had several issues with water infiltration into those doors. They get in, the gym floor is very expensive, obviously, to repair. So we'd like to just add some covers over those to help deflect the water on the outside. The third one over on the bottom is a picture of DPS, and this is actually a really good picture. It kind of shows an issue that we have at many schools, and that is plaster ceilings above suspended ceilings that are deteriorating. So if you look up on the top here, this is actually the ceiling that I'm talking about. We've had a lot of areas, actually just Janae in the last project, where a lot of those ceilings are falling down. We looked above a ceiling in the Belltop teacher lounge, and we had to throw that into the project to get that ceiling removed because it was just about ready to collapse. And it's unfortunate because it's hidden by these drop ceilings. So we don't want to take any chances. We want to get those removed, and we want to get the new ceilings up and suspended properly. And that unfortunately is an abatement cost on top of the removal costs on top of putting new ceilings back up. So there's a lot involved there. And then the one on the right, I just threw in as, this is a number 2 priority, but I think a lot of schools have areaways that could use some improvement. At Janae, this is the rear of Janae, but as you know, Janae kind of sits funny on the lot. So this is really the main entrance point for student drop-off by parents. So this is what they see when they pull up there. So we'd like to do some adjustments to it just to clean it up and dress it up a little bit and make it a little more sightly and presentable to our taxpayers. So a lot of these are athletic related. So up on the upper left 2 corners, those are our baseball fields, the varsity field over at Columbia. Some of you may have heard this past spring we weren't able to hold the first 8 games there because the field was underwater. It's a low-hanging field, low-lying field. That along with the lower lacrosse / soccer field over in that area are usually unusable in the springtime, unfortunately, just because they're so low. We've thought about how the tech park above that has, affected us. A lot of their water sheds onto our property now, and these are already low-laying fields. So we really need to do something to make those usable year-round. In the middle here, we've got the basketball courts. If any of you have taken a close walk on those, the cracks are pretty wide. You can get a foot caught in them very easily. during the summertime, they're constantly growing grass and weeds between them. So it's kind of dangerous. On the right are the lacrosse, this is the lower lacrosse and soccer field that I was talking about, Columbia. We'd like to completely reconstruct the tennis courts at Columbia. We do get a lot of complaints, not only from the athletic staff, but also from the community. The community is big users of those courts because there's not a lot of courts in this area. So that's a big thing we'd like to rehab and fit into this project. And the next one over on the right is just, unfortunately, a commonality in some areas with some drainage basin problems that we have throughout the district. Continuing on with some sports items, over at Janae's Fields, both the side fields and the Pop Warner Field are actually our best fields in the district, believe it or not, as far as water drainage, but they could use a resurface and a top dress and reseed to level them out. And in talking with Pop Warner, that was one of the items they'd like to see. We actually used the Pop Warner field this past spring because our fields over at Columbia were inadequate and wet at the time. And on the right are some more pictures of the Columbia baseball field and dugouts that we'd also like to look to replace at this time. Continuing on with obsolete and aging facilities. The pictures on the left are inside and outside of the central receiving area of Columbia High School. Every time it rains, water comes down through there and puddles in that area. Unfortunately, it was a poor design from the start. It was an addition to the school, but not a very well engineered design. So that's an area that is definitely a priority one. We're actually looking at into some precautions that we may be able to throw in place temporarily just to make sure that is stable until we get to the point to where we could possibly replace it in the project. The next picture over is Red Mill. There's some water infiltration in the back wing, the back loop areas there that we need to work on. Going right below that slide, this is the Goff water main here, and it's actually old galvanized steel, and there is a large priority right now on lead in water. The EPA is changing it from 15 parts per billion to 5 parts per billion. So a lot of things that we're looping into this capital project are hopefully to protect us and let us test properly for reduction in lead in water in all of our facilities going forward. And on the right here, right bottom, is a picture of a classroom actually where the paint is deteriorating, and that's from moisture that's actually getting through the walls and making its way in and trapping it, and then it's causing the paint to flake off the walls. Just a couple more slides here and we'll be done. I didn't want to leave playgrounds out. So we had talked in previous board meetings that we are already underway as far as looking for development and design of playgrounds at Janae and Red Mill. So on the right, you'll see some of that, the initial designs that we're working off of. And on the left is current pictures of Belltop. As you can see, it's just not a very, it's an older structure, and it's just a lot of washout. It's at the bottom of a hill, so we have a lot of areas that are very difficult to access with ADA accessibility. My final slide is just some information on the roofs throughout the district. So we, working with March Associates, had a company roof scan come in and do roof scans of all of the buildings in the district. And the red areas show where water is infiltrating the roofs. So this is Columbia High School. Columbia High School, all of the roof warranties are actually expiring. So we're at a point where we have no choice but to replace that roof. And obviously, that's a 290,000 square foot building. So that's going to be a relatively high expense. But as you can see from the water infiltration on it, it's a necessary expense. So that's all we have for you tonight. And we're just going to open it up to any questions you have. Thank you very much.
So one of the things I said at the beginning was we tried to not only reflect in this document the engineering and architectural analysis, but some of the priorities that have been reflected in our discussions over the last few years in terms of athletic fields. You recall we did an athletic field review back in 2018. The numbers reflected in the spreadsheet include updated numbers at current costs plus 25% for incidentals. We've had meetings with various community groups that we share facilities with to kind of get their input in the sense of what they've done since that athletic review was done in 2018 to try to incorporate their input. We had mentioned playgrounds at previous, and we have talked about modernizing our instructional spaces, and we started that discussion with the librarian. So when all of this gets put into the mix, it's a very big price tag. And so from here, at this point forward, we want to take the board's questions, feedback from the community, fine tune some of the work, and get to a scope, as I mentioned earlier, that the board can support. And that is within a cost that can support the information and the analysis that Mrs. Wager did in terms of what the overall borrowing would be, how that borrowing would be spread out over 15 years, how we can time the project in such a way to maximize the fact that we are retiring debt and keeping that local share at about the $2.5 million level that it has been within the general fund budget. Those are all the factors that kind of go into this. And again, this is just the starting point. We want to open it up for questions and concerns at this point.
Board members, questions? It's a lot of information. We appreciate all the work that went into it. So, Mark.
In 2017, when we did the last capital project, did we put that out for a vote as well in the month of October?
No,
Or
we
is
did that.
with The school budget vote?
We did it with the school budget.
Is there a reason why we don't want to do that again this year?
Well, part of the timing is we won't be able to do the due diligence that we need to do between now and this May in order to put out the vote. So if we wanted to do it, if the board decided they would prefer to do it on the budget vote, it would have to be next May. And in Linda's example of an October vote, we felt that we could get all of the work done, the stakeholder input, the financial information prepared in time for an October vote, but that we would be rushing it and potentially not have sufficient input to do it and have the support that we need by this May. So if we decided to not do it in the fall, we would have to wait till the following spring vote, which would be May of 2024. So it's really the time needed to do all the pre-referendum work necessary to have everything, in good order.
Other questions?
Yeah, I'd like to have more discussion on that timeline.
And that was just an example that we put in, and we picked October because we couldn't get the work done.
Like John just said, we did a vote once before on an off budget month, and it failed.
Yeah.
It failed bad.
Yeah.
It was in the fall, and then we.
It was actually in December. It was in December, and at the same time that we did that, it was the same year that the two young people from Shenendehowa were killed, and it was the same night that they were doing a big thing for them. And so the timing, through no fault of anybody's, ended up being horrible, and we had a very, very poor turnout.
Right.
I think to address Mark's concern, if we decide to do the fall vote because of the timing sensibilities, as we go through our budget and incorporate that information, that this is going to be coming, so that folks are aware that we are working on this, which we're going to be doing
Right.
anyways, and just keep that information out in the public
Right.
so that they can expect that vote, so that they don't
Right.
have interpreted as us trying to do something
Right.
differently because of.
That's part of the reason that we are doing this now, and we're going to have many public discussions of it, because we didn't want it to come as a perception that we're doing something differently for any other reason but making sure that we have done a thorough analysis. And yeah, so this is one of the issues that we wanted the board to weigh in on, was the timing of a proposition.
I have two overall comments. I think this is good. The cost of these projects are not going down. That was probably one of the most in-depth financial explanations of a cause and analysis. So that was very informative, and I think that's very important. The second factor is, I think as we go through this public process, we might be prepared to say to the folks, capital project as versus a building project. There might be a stir in the community to say, we're spending all this money continuously on older buildings. At some point, do we decide to build a new building? And I'm not saying that's the direction we should go in, but I think we need to have the information to answer that question if it's asked,
Right.
as a comparison. You know, it's cheaper to do it this way or to do it this way.
Right. In general, it is less expensive, and you get more state reimbursement for fixing your existing
Right.
buildings, and the state incentivizes that through the building aid formula. Right. Other questions? Any items specifically within the work that the architects did and Paul did that you want to ask about?
I was really impressed with how thorough everything is, and I like how within the district you categorized it even further down with, environmental and safety factors. I like to see so many changes that are going to be made for ADA compliance. I didn't realize so many, especially like I think it was the Belltop playground. I didn't realize how inaccessible that was. So that's clearly a priority. And as difficult as I know it will be to get people out for like an off year budget, let's say in October, I'd hate to delay it for an entire year as well. I'd like to see if we could get as much publicity out as possible to make it happen
Very good.
and get voters out.
Good. One of the things that our architect reminded us of at one of our planning meetings, and we should probably point this out as you bring up, Jennifer, handicapped accessibility and ADA compliance. We work on ADA compliance every project, and people might say, well, ADA, the law, the Americans with Disabilities Act, has been around since the first President Bush. Why are we still working on it? It's because these facilities, as were indicated in the document, were built some in the 50s, some in the 60s, some in the 70s, at the time when that was not a spec, handicapped accessibility. And the state likes to see approximately 20%, 25% of the project focusing on that area of access to people with disabilities.
For some of these older buildings, we're just kind of chipping away at some of the problems
Exactly.
that are been there for years.
Exactly.
Yeah, literally.
Other questions or comments?
Yeah, I have a comment. The amount of work that's being done and that's projected not to be able to do a project for a few years to actually do the work, is there concerns about some of the infrastructure? You mentioned boilers, roofs, things like that, kind of ending their life cycle. I mean, that's a
Do we
potential
think
issue.
right now our boilers and
I mean,
our
are we
systems
looking pretty
will
urgent here?
make it to 2025?
I mean, that's what I mean. You get 2-3 years of time here. Just for your, my next question, Jeff, for you would be, there's not a lot of instructional space if outside the libraries here. I'd like to see something more in tune to some of the instructional pieces. A lot of infrastructure, a lot of exterior, nothing on the inside except for libraries.
We've reached out to the music people, because the music people presented their program review. We let them know we're going to have a meeting with them after the holidays. I talked to the union about engaging with the teachers and the administrators, and we've made sure that our stakeholders understand that this information was our first blush, and we intend to still meet with some of our classroom teachers, our principals, our special area teachers to talk about classroom space design. We started with the librarians because it was fresh in our mind. They'd come to a recent board meeting. Next, we're going to do music. And then we're going to work through a process where they get a chance to tell us what some of the design challenges are within their current classrooms. And we also want to modernize the spaces as much as we can, like we did with the tech shops here at Goff.
Yes.
And we did with the science rooms, and that we're proposing for some of the libraries.
Yep.
So we plan to have further conversations and
Okay.
more information
So
on that.
there could be some more items on the
Yes,
in
absolutely.
project. Thank you.
Yeah, just to answer your question, we're constantly chipping away at maintenance, and that's really what it is, maintenance. We have a lot of contracts in place, mostly through Train, to watch over our boilers and let us know what's happening with them. Thankfully, there are replacement parts available, but it's very expensive. So the older boilers have what they call sections in them, and we've had a lot of the sections go, and that's a very expensive proposition. It basically rusts out, and the whole boiler needs to be shut down, put in place. So it's a lot, and it pulls directly from the maintenance budget, which is obviously 100% taxpayer money. So to be able to get these into where, we have 73% coverage from the state is huge. But to answer your question, yeah, we just continue to chip away at it. I don't think there's anything looming out there. I hope I didn't give you a doom or gloom
No, it's okay.
idea there, but we did fit a lot of things into this last project, like the Goff pipes. That was a big concern of mine. Those pipes were rusted out, so we were able to fit that in. The Columbia fire alarm system was a huge concern. Those parts were obsolete. We couldn't get them anymore. They were buying them off eBay to keep the system going. So we were fortunate we were able to get that into this project. So I feel comfortable enough that we're in a place to where with maintenance and with what's available, we can make it to the next project.
The costs of energy continue to rise, and we're proposing replacing things of more energy efficient, like natural gas, right? Is there any future suggestions about other types of alternative energy that could be accessed? I mean, a few years back, we had a solar project that was kind of it didn't really work for us at the time. But is there anything like that we should be planning for as well to supplement those energy needs?
We haven't talked a lot about that. Steve, I don't know if you want to comment on alternative energy in terms of our design.
Solar is still is an option we can take a look at. There was also a discussion about geothermal at several of the buildings, which we're taking a look at. How it fits in, we need to work out yet, but there are multiple energy savings measures we could take in that regard.
Very good. Thank you.
One thing we didn't talk about was the transportation center. We have put a placeholder in the document. We don't know exactly what upgrades the transportation center would be in terms of the electric bus requirement, but we have put a number in there and a placeholder until we get further information. So it's really just an estimate that is really needs to be fine-tuned.
Sure.
And we're looking at how the state may shift in terms of their willingness to aid those kinds of projects. Mark?
So Columbia High School, I see there was a piece in there about that alternative entrance going out the back through the tech park.
Yeah.
And it says TBD. Can you submit to state ed a TBD? I mean, are we going to figure something out before we get?
We're
this
trying
in there?
to. I can give you an update on that. We've had discussions with Greenbush Associates, who operate and own a lot of the properties at the tech park. We had those discussions, and they indicated a willingness for us to be able to put an access road for emergency use only out the back, and to Tech Valley Road. They suggested that we talk to Regeneron because the more ideal location from their vantage point was at a building that had just been acquired by Regeneron. About 2 weeks ago, we had a discussion with Regeneron's. He came in, he was very gracious with his time and his information, their facilities person. We talked about a potential location for that road. There are issues involved with the DEC that would be involved in terms of the SWIFT ponds. Is that what you call them? SWIFT ponds in terms of stormwater pollution management. And we are going to be following up with our architects to put together a design and then run it by both of those parties again before we start having conversations with the DEC. But we're moving down a path of cooperation with those two entities to try to identify a location for the road. And we can show you at a future meeting what we're talking about in terms of a map of the property. But it is pretty significant in terms of what would be required to either acquire that property and build a road, okay, purchase the property, the district purchases the property and builds the road, or to get an appropriate easement. There is an easement there right now that the town got, but that easement is, according to Regeneron, inaccurate in terms of the property line. So that was another piece of information that we were able to get. Anything further on that?
In order to get state aid on an access road, we do need to purchase the property. It has to be on school property. So like Jeff said, we're trying to see if we can relocate possible silt ponds and find a better way out of the property. That's why it's to be determined. I had a very worst case scenario, very large number, and we said, let's take a step back and see if we can find a better way to do it.
And secondly, the road out to Luther Road from the high school, we had them sidewalks put in on Luther Road, the state and the town through the grant and stuff like that. We got sidewalks going up to the library. What are the chances on getting a sidewalk all the way down to connect to the sidewalks on Luther Road?
That is included in the estimate for the repaving of the road into the high school. That sidewalk on the side closest to the
Maintenance garage?
yes, is included in that estimate. And actually, we had a student group for the participation in government class do a project on that and propose that sidewalk that I met with just the other day. And it was good to be able to tell them that the architects have put that in the estimate. So,
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
I was even thinking of going, I mean, one of the things that we talked about a few years ago too was that whole redesign of the front of Columbia entrance
yes.
in terms of the access and the issues that we had, like the town, maybe we're going to do a grant, and then the engineering firm did a study. I mean, I challenge you to look at the whole front of Columbia. I mean, a lot of times what we do is we just take what exists and we just repave it, redo it, but we don't think about why do the basketball courts have to be there? Why do the tennis courts have to be there? Why does the parking lot have to be like this direction? It's like we layer things on, we just pull it out and put it back in the same way. Let's envision something about the whole, like Columbia. Do the tennis courts have to be there? Maybe they should be over by the parking lot, expand the parking lot that way. Can we think about those kinds of things?
We already are. We've talked about moving the tennis courts where the basketball courts are now. And we've also talked about moving the basketball courts where the tennis courts are now and reviewing that, creating some additional parking. We've met with students and talked about some of the issues with safety where the kids are parking their cars and crossing through as parents are dropping kids off. So we've had some of those conversations. We haven't finalized the design. And years ago, before COVID hit, the town and I did go out to Luther Road, and we also looked at some traffic control devices that were in place in Averill Park.
Mm-hmm.
We wrote a letter that the board supported and the town board supported to the Department of Transportation, and we didn't get a response. So I think earlier this year, I did have a conversation with Jack Conway and Dan Fiacco.
Yes.
Dan Fiacco about repicking that up and seeing if the state could come out and help us review that, the front entrance Luther Road issue and see what we could do to make it safer. So
And maybe some of our Assiliman can help us with some of those things. I know they like to visit and talk about stuff and maybe using some of that
That's an excellent idea.
resource.
That's an excellent idea. Okay, I want to give Sano Rubin, Tom Siriano,
Okay.
Siriani, or Dave a chance to talk. Tom's been working on our current project. He's pretty familiar with our facilities.
Thank you, Mr. Simon. So, to one of the points earlier, I just wanted to say that we would work with the district with the planning of the project if it was to go forward and approve. And even before the vote, to make a schedule, high level, the best timing and places to start work and begin, this type of an extensive project. If it's starting with boiler replacements or other classroom renovations to minimize disruption and put the best projects we can out to bid to get a response from contractors and get started. So just wanted to comment on that.
Great. Thank you.
One point I just want to highlight before we wrap it up, and I know I appreciate everybody's time. One of the things that Paul spoke about that I want to highlight a little bit. Throughout the document, you see different proposals for the fields, the athletic fields. When we met with physical education teachers, the athletic director, Ryan Jones, and the coaches, there were different ideas that were being brainstormed regarding fields, okay? For example, an additional turf field. We do have a situation that is somewhat challenging in terms of the number of kids that compete for use of the turf field in our district. And it is not beyond the realm of feasibility to put another turf field in somewhere in the district. And whether you did that at the high school or you did that at Goff is something that was kind of up in the air, advantages to both. One of the things that I feel is underdeveloped is the property right behind here. Okay, we have community fields right over here in terms of Sorensko Little League, girls softball. There's really nothing usable back there. Okay, it's underwater most of the year. It was never graded to be an athletic field, and it affects the physical education program here. There's really limited limitations to what our PE program can do out here. But if they had a turf field and a track or a grass field with appropriate drainage, it would not only enhance the interscholastic sports program because we have modified sports that could practice here more. It would enhance the physical education program, and it would be a good community project in terms of community use, and to tie that into the fields that you have over here. So I think it's a win on three different considerations, and I really would ask the board to think about doing some development here at Goff as a priority, particularly as it relates to the fields behind the building. I really am pretty certain that that would be well received and well supported within our community, among all the number of the other things. But I think this is one of the things the board has said. We want to pay more attention to the middle school. We want to support the middle school. I think this is one of multiple things that we could do to that would really be very positively perceived by the community. With that, we'll close. We appreciate your time. Again, if you have questions after looking at these documents, what's behind the number, what goes into this, just please email us. We're going to keep this on our radar for a while now. Thank you very much for all your time and attention.
Thank you. I just want to appreciate everyone who came this evening, and I know it's kind of coming up the holidays, and you're traveling, and some of you are not local, so we appreciate that you made that appearance. It's important to us to see you, and I think it speaks volumes to the care that you're providing, and the work that you're providing, and the professionalism that you're bringing to the work here for the district, and we appreciate that. Thank you. All right, so we did the reports and discussion, right? So we're good there? Okay. Back on the agenda, and if you guys got to take off, feel free to take off. I don't want to hold you up. Their families are traveling. Okay, thank you very much. We now move to the approval of programs for resident children with disabilities. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, I need a motion to approve that. Joanne, second. Kathleen, all those in favor? Approved. You guys were a yes, right? Okay. Making sure. The consent agenda has 3 items, actually, A, B, and C. Do we have anything else that was added, Jeff, that was on the addendum
We
side?
added an addendum.
Okay, we'll get to that
related
then.
To the bus driver appointment, we added a bus driver and also the Science Olympiad
Okay,
to the MIT invitation.
got it. Okay, can we add those to the consent component of the agenda, if that's okay with everybody? That addendum, those 2 items? Okay, motion approved by consent, if there's no questions first? Questions, comments? John, you good? To agree with Kathleen. First, a second, those in favor? And this includes the addendums that are found later in the agenda. Great, thank you. We are going on to the new business. Board members, any new business to bring forward? No? Okay. Public forum? Mr. McHugh, great to see you here in Goff. Hope things are going well. Mr. Mahar, Ms. Gualachi, how are you? Thank you. And Dr. McQueen. Glad you're here. No new business? All right. Public forum and board forum. Emily, anything? Good. Joanne? Kathleen? Jennifer? Mark? And John? Good. All right. We have no need for an executive session items? No? Okay. I didn't have any, so. With that, I need a motion to adjourn. John, second. Joanne, all those in favor? All right. Have a great evening. Have a great holiday season, everyone. Thank you for all your work you do and to your families for everything, and enjoy.